Welcome back folks, my name's Shane, I hope you're doing well. In today's video we're checking out the Yongnuo 17mm f1.7 prime lens for micro four thirds. This lens represents a lot about what I love about micro four thirds. It's small, compact, lightweight, and it's also affordable. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. Before we get into this video though, massive thanks to Yongnuo for sending this out for review. I really appreciate it. I actually contacted them, which I don't often do when it comes to wanting to review products, but I thought I'd send them an email and say, hey, can I test this with my GH7 and G9 Mark II? Because I was scouring reviews online to see if this was a viable autofocus lens for the GH7 or G9 Mark II. I couldn't find anything, and being that I have both cameras, I thought I'd ask and see if they were interested. So massive thanks to the folks from Yongnuo for sending this out. As always though, this will be a pros and cons review. They don't get to preview this video ahead of time and all that kind of stuff. So I hope you find it helpful. If you can, leave a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. Let's get into it. If you're familiar with the Panasonic Leica 15mm f1.7 prime lens, you know just how great that lens is. Now, I'm not going to say the end result out of this is better, but I always wish that that was a 17mm lens. I would have preferred that kind of 35mm look in the studio over a typical 30. There is a difference there at the end of the day. Now, some people might prefer 15mm if you're doing straight up street photography, but I don't think you'll have a problem using any 35mm in that particular scenario either. Thanks to the fast f1.7 aperture, I'm still able to create nice shallow depth of field in the studio or when I'm shooting outside in the field, which is fantastic. And thanks to that aperture, you can also take your camera out and shoot in low light. I'm going to show you some examples of the GH7 paired with the Yongnuo f1.7 prime up to about 3200 ISO. Here we go. This 17mm f1.7 lens comes in at only 178 US dollars or around 309 Australian dollars, which puts it about 300 Australian dollars cheaper than the Lumix 15mm f1.7, which is that little Leica lens. Fantastic lens. And for its price, I think it holds up really well. Sure, this is made of plastic, but one of the benefits of that is it's nice and light, coming in at only 180 grams. The focus ring on this is nice and wide, and it feels very similar in terms of its feel to something like the 25mm f1.7 prime lens from Lumix. So if you're familiar with that lens, this has a very similar feel. Now, one thing to note about this, unlike Lumix lenses on a Lumix camera body, this won't plug in to the linear focusing mode on the camera. So you can't set a threshold or degrees of how far you need to turn the focus ring to pull focus repeatably and reliably. That option's just grayed out on the camera, so you are stuck with the focus by wire experience. Pulling focus from minimum to infinity focus using the ring, it actually goes in the opposite direction, which has messed with my mind. All my lenses go the opposite way, and this is the exception now to that rule. But if you just plan on using autofocus, it shouldn't be an issue. One of the big complaints a lot of people have with this lens is in regards to the non-removable lens hood. I sort of have mixed emotions about this. While I don't mind that in the studio, if I want to add a filter or even take a filter off, it becomes a little bit more problematic. The only other complaint I have about it is that this lens cap is really hard to get in. Just when you think you've got it in, it will fall out, and it's done this a whole bunch of times. I've picked it up off the ground a lot. It took me till then to actually click it into place properly. So yeah, minor complaint, but definitely worth mentioning. There's a few really cool things about this lens that I like. One, we get an autofocus manual focus switch on the side. And while there's no dedicated aperture ring like the Panasonic Leica 15mm f1.7, the aperture range goes all the way from f1.7 at its brightest all the way down to f22, so it's very usable. Up next, we're going to talk about overall image quality. So even at f1.7, this lens is really sharp in the center, and it continues that way all the way down to about f16 or so. And then after that, it gets a little bit weird, as you can see from these examples. While this lens is nice and sharp when something's in focus, the out of focus areas or the bokeh actually looks really smooth to my eye. As you can see from this example, close up on this dummy on the ground. Again, the background blur itself actually looks quite pleasing. I was also very impressed with the Sunstar starburst quality you can get out of this lens, as you can see from this low light example. The car's headlights look really cool, and given the price of this lens, this is a pleasant surprise. Now, for a video shooter, another huge positive to this lens is that the focus breathing is minimal, which means how far the lens appears to zoom in and out as it pulls focus from minimum to infinity focus. Usually less expensive lenses have a ton of focus breathing, and it usually differentiates them from some of the more premium lenses, unless you're talking about G Master lenses. But yeah, it is what it is. So focus breathing is quite common, but it's great to see that this has what I would consider low focus breathing. Now let's talk about a few of the trade-offs with the Yongnuo 17mm f1.7, starting with flaring. So this lens does have a lot of flaring. I watched a few other reviews where they said it was kept to a minimum, but I noticed it even with artificial lighting. So yeah, just make sure that you're going to be shooting away from a bright light source and you shouldn't have any issues. Secondly, this lens also suffers from chromatic aberration. So if you're in a high contrast situation, for example, you will notice some green or purple fringing. I also noticed it in the studio shooting some product shots under controlled lighting. If I got the angle of the product wrong, there was chromatic aberration on the logos or on some of those higher contrast areas. Maybe the most important factor with this lens when it comes to producing content or photos, video, whatever, is that it doesn't look like it has any in-camera corrections. Now, I could be wrong about this, but it almost looks like it's slightly bowed outways, so it's giving us a slight fisheye effect. Now, I didn't notice this when shooting outside at all. I only noticed it when I had some straight lines right behind me here in the studio for my podcast. So I had to run the fisheye effect in Final Cut and reduce it by 0.5, and then it looked fine. So this is just another piece of workflow that you'll need to add if you plan on using this indoors with a lot of parallel lines. But the great news is I didn't notice it for just general purpose photography or video outside of that exact situation. But it's definitely worth mentioning. If you've got experience with this lens already, drop a comment down below and let other users know how you found this lens for you personally when it comes to any signs of distortion. All right, let's do a quick autofocus test using the GH7 without any custom autofocus settings. So this is all just stock standard. I'm just gonna do a few basic tests here with human detection on. So I can see the yellow box around my face. I'm gonna walk back a bit and walk to the camera a little quicker, and we'll see whether or not it works. I'll jump out of frame, jump back in, and we're gonna test this out. Now, the great news is, out of all of the times I've used this lens, it's not failed me once when it comes to autofocus performance. So yeah, I would highly recommend this if you've got one of the new phase hybrid autofocus systems, whether that's in the G9 Mark II or the GH7, it shouldn't be a problem. Now let's try a product showcase test. So if you're buying this lens for a YouTube channel, you might do unboxing videos. That's what this test is all about. Look how smooth the autofocus pull is. I love it. And this is without any customization. It just looks much better than some of the native Lumix lenses, which pull focus almost instantaneously. So if you're someone who's doing filmmaking or you want to get a nice smooth focus pull to something that you're holding up like this is a really great choice. All right, I've turned off all the tracking modes on the autofocus. I'm gonna go from the foreground to the background and back to the foreground a few times here so you can see just how smoothly it pulls focus. I'm really impressed with the look of the focus pull here. So if you're doing a short film, for example, this lens will do a really great job at pulling focus from your subject to the background or foreground. As you can see, pretty cool. Now I've got the E-stabilization on the GH7, and this will be the same if you're shooting with the G9 Mark II. So you get nice stable results out of this. Now obviously this is too tight for vlogging, but if you plan on doing a follow shot of somebody handheld behind them or in front of them or whatever, it's going to work great. I've still got autofocus on. As you can see, it's going to go to the background, go to the foreground, and then I'm getting straight out of camera stable results. So yeah, this will vary depending on the camera system that you're using, but yeah, I would consider this completely usable. Focus breathing is really well controlled. Take a look at this. There's very little movement on the edge of frame as it pulls focus from minimum to infinity focus. And this is doing a really great job. I'm using a one area box right in the center, a little small box. There's no second guessing or anything, but definitely no focus breathing here, 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 or here. Take another look. Perfect. Minimum focus is 18 centimeters, and I'll put the American inches scale on screen. And this allows you to get nice and close to your subject while completely obliterating the background. While this lens is excellent value, I don't like recommending something that I wouldn't use myself. So I'm going to talk about whether or not I would use this personally. Now, if I'm in the studio under controlled lighting conditions, I want to do a talk to camera piece like this, I would absolutely use this. I don't think it's going to be a problem. Would this be my first choice for high contrast situations outside on a bright sunny day? No. If you're shooting outside and it's overcast, or if you're in a situation where the sun's not directly sort of hitting the glass, you're not going to have too much of an issue with flaring. The barrel distortion is something that I only noticed in the studio and not outside in the field. So for those times where I want something light, small, and portable, I would definitely take this with me. While this lens isn't perfect, it's still very impressive considering the value for money. Again, 178 US dollars for a 17mm f1.7 prime lens with autofocus. It's pretty great value. And if you're just getting into photography or video, I think this is a really great choice. Thanks for watching.